I object. The words hit the chapel harder than thunder. 1 second I was staring at Ethan's perfect smile, my fingers trembling around a bouquet of white roses, and the next, every head turned toward the back doors. A woman stood there in a dark coat, breathing hard like she had run for miles. Her hair was half fallen from its clip. Her eyes were wild but not crazy. Desperate. She lifted a shaking hand and pointed straight at the man I was about to marry. "Don't let her say yes," she said. "His real name isn't Ethan." The room went dead silent. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. I heard my sister Brooke suck in a breath behind me. I heard one of Ethan's groomsmen whisper, "What the hell?" But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because the look on Ethan's face lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Not confusion. Not embarrassment. Fear. And then the woman pulled out her phone, raised it high enough for me to see, and said, "I have proof. He did this to my sister, and if you marry him today you'll be next." I didn't know it then, but my wedding didn't fall apart in that moment. It saved my life. 3 months earlier, I would have laughed if someone told me I'd ever wear a white dress again. Not because I had been married before. I hadn't. It was worse than that. I had spent 5 years taking care of my mother while cancer took her apart one cruel piece at a time, and by the end of it I barely recognized myself. I was 31, tired all the time, living in the old blue Victorian house my mother had loved, and moving through each day like someone walking underwater. People love to talk about grief like it makes you wise. Sometimes it just makes you lonely enough to trust the wrong person. My older sister Brooke didn't help much when our mother was sick. She sent flowers, expensive soup deliveries, guilt wrapped in pretty little bows. But she wasn't there for the vomiting, the midnight fevers, the morphine confusion, or the mornings when Mom forgot what year it was and asked me if Dad was late from work even though he'd been dead for 12 years. When Mom passed, Brooke cried beautifully at the funeral, held everyone's hands, and somehow still found time to ask our lawyer whether the house was really just in Ava's name. I should have heard the warning in that question. But I didn't know what was coming next. I met Ethan 10 days after the funeral, when I still looked like grief had dressed me. No makeup. Hair tied back. Eyes swollen from crying in private because public crying made people uncomfortable. I was at a hardware store buying paint samples because I had convinced myself repainting my mother's bedroom would stop it from smelling like hospital soap and loss. He reached past me for the same color card. "Sea glass," he said with a smile. "Either we have the same taste, or one of us is making a terrible mistake." It was such a stupid line. I laughed anyway. He was warm in a way that didn't feel fake at first. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He didn't flinch when I mentioned my mother. He didn't rush to say something shallow like, "She's in a better place." He just nodded and said, "That kind of pain changes the shape of your whole day, doesn't it?" And because that was exactly right, I looked at him longer than I meant to. He told me he renovated old homes. He said he loved places with history because they hold on for us when we can't hold on for ourselves. I remember thinking no man had ever said anything to me that sounded so gentle. That should have scared me more than it did. The first few weeks with Ethan felt like finally breathing after years of smoke. He brought groceries without asking. He fixed the loose hinge on my front gate. He sat on the kitchen floor with me one night while I cried over a chipped coffee mug that used to belong to my mom, and he didn't try to stop the crying. He just stayed. When someone is patient with your pain, it can feel a lot like love. Even Brooke liked him, which should have been its own red flag. My sister had a talent for finding flaws in everything and everyone. She hated my college boyfriend because he chewed too loudly. She hated my best friend Tessa because she said Tessa looked unserious. She hated the wallpaper in Mom's dining room, the neighborhood, the lawyer, the florist from the funeral, and most of the decisions I had ever made. But when I brought Ethan to dinner, she practically glowed. "He's polished," she said after he left. "Finally. Someone who can help you move forward." Help me move forward. At the time it sounded supportive. Now I know it sounded like a plan. Things moved fast after that. Too fast if I'm honest. Ethan said life was too fragile to waste time pretending we had forever. He said after what I'd been through, I deserved certainty. He started staying over more often. He knew exactly when to hold me and exactly when to say my name in that low voice that made me feel chosen instead of pitted. By month 4 he was talking about marriage like it was already decided. When he proposed, he did it in my mother's garden at dusk, with tiny white lights hanging from the fence and her favorite song playing softly from a speaker hidden behind the hydrangeas. He got down on one knee and said, "Let me make this house feel alive again." I said yes before I even looked at the ring. And that wasn't the worst part. The red flags were there. They were always there. I just kept painting over them in the colors of hope. Ethan never let me stop by his apartment unannounced. There was always some reason. Plumbing issue. Landlord inspection. Work crew sleeping over after a late project. He said one of his jobs was an hour away, but he never gave me the address. He took most calls outside. When his phone lit up, he turned it over. He told me his family was complicated, and because mine was too, I let that answer stand. Tessa didn't. Tessa had been my friend since 7th grade, which meant she knew every version of my face, including the one I wore when I was pretending not to see something. One night, while helping me address wedding invitations, she put down her pen and said, "You know I love you, right?" I smiled. That's usually how bad news starts. "I'm serious, Ava. I like him. I do. But there's something off." I kept writing. Define off. "He asks too many questions about the house. About your mom's will. About when you'll sell. About insurance. About what happens if you renovate versus move." I shrugged, even though my stomach tightened. "He works in property. He thinks like that." Tessa didn't blink. "Then why does he think like that about your life?" I laughed it off. I wish I could say that was ignorance. It was fear. Because once you admit something is wrong, you have to decide what to do about it. The house became a bigger topic the closer the wedding got. Ethan said the blue Victorian was full of memories that kept me stuck. He said we could sell it, buy something modern, bright, open. A new chapter, he called it. Brooke agreed immediately. Too immediately. "You don't want to become one of those women who spends the rest of her life living inside a shrine," she said over brunch, stirring her coffee like she was delivering wisdom. "Mom is gone. You need to be practical." Practical. That was Brooke's favorite word when she wanted something that belonged to me. I told them both I wasn't ready. Ethan smiled and kissed my forehead. Brooke rolled her eyes. But a week later, Ethan brought over paperwork for a preliminary consultation with a real estate attorney. He said it was just to understand options after the wedding. I almost signed the whole packet before Tessa snatched it out of my hand and flipped through it. "This isn't consultation paperwork," she said sharply. "This is authorization." Ethan laughed. "It's standard language. You know how legal forms are." Tessa looked at him for a long second. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly why people should read them." He smiled, but his jaw tightened. I saw it. Then I ignored it. Because the dress had been bought. The venue had been booked. The invitations were already in the mail. There is a kind of humiliation that comes from admitting your dream might be built on rotten wood. And I wasn't ready for that humiliation yet. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 4:12 a.m. with a feeling so sharp it felt like a hand closing around my throat. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the hotel suite, the dress hanging by the window, the makeup artist arriving at 7, the fact that by sunset I was supposed to be someone's wife. I walked barefoot to the bathroom, splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked beautiful. I also looked like a woman trying to convince herself she wasn't standing in the wrong life. At 8:30, while the bridesmaids buzzed around me and Brooke complained that the florist had used too much greenery, I looked out the window and saw a woman near the chapel gate arguing with one of the venue staff. Dark coat. Fast movements. Angry, urgent, almost frantic. The same woman who would later stand at the back of my wedding and break it open with one sentence. I asked Brooke who she was. Brooke glanced over and said, "Probably some local crazy person. Ignore it." I almost believed her. And then everything changed. By the time the ceremony began, the chapel felt too warm. The guests blurred at the edges. I remember my shoes clicking against the wooden floor. I remember Ethan waiting at the altar, hands clasped, eyes shining with what I thought was devotion. Everyone stood. Music floated through the air. My veil brushed my shoulders. My heart was beating too hard. The officiant smiled at us, said the usual words, and led us through vows that suddenly sounded like lines from a play I had never auditioned for. Then came the moment. "If anyone present knows of any lawful reason these two should not be joined in marriage," the officiant said, "speak now or forever hold your peace." I object. Same voice. Stronger now. The woman stepped into the aisle. Two ushers moved toward her, but she shoved a folder into the air and shouted, "Don't touch me." Ask him who Rachel Danner is. Ask him why he married her under the name Luke. Ask him why she ended up in intensive care after changing her bank accounts for him. A sound went through the guests like a single body gasping. Ethan turned to me with perfect outrage. Ava, I swear to God I have no idea who this woman is. The stranger laughed and the sound was so broken it made my skin go cold. That's funny. My sister said the same thing before she woke up with a fractured skull. My bouquet slipped in my hand. One rose fell to the floor. But what I saw next shocked me. The woman walked right up to the front pew and held out her phone. My name is Naomi, she said to me, not to the room. And if you look at this and still marry him, at least I'll know I tried. I stepped down from the altar before anyone could stop me. On the screen was a picture of Ethan. Not a man who looked like him. Ethan. Same mouth. Same eyes. Same small white scar at the base of his chin that he once told me came from falling off a bike when he was 9. He was standing beside a blonde woman in a courthouse hallway. His arm was around her waist. She was smiling at the camera. In his other hand was a marriage license. The name on the document wasn't Ethan Vale. It was Luke Danner. My hearing thinned into a high ringing sound. I flipped to the next photo. Ethan, Luke, whatever his name was, on a hospital chair beside the same woman. Her face swollen. Bruises along her temple. Then bank transfer screenshots. Insurance forms. A copy of a driver's license with Ethan's face and a different name. Another document. Another. No, Ethan snapped, voice sharp now. She's lying. Naomi stared at him with such hatred it felt almost physical. Then tell her where Rachel is. He didn't answer. That was the first crack. Not in the wedding. In him. I looked up at Ethan and suddenly all the softness was gone. He was still handsome. Still calm looking to anyone who didn't know him. But I knew him. At least I knew the rhythm of his face. And for the first time I saw calculation moving behind it like a blade sliding free. Ava, he said quietly, stepping toward me, she's sick. Please don't do this here. Do this here. As if I were the one doing anything. As if I were the storm and he was the victim caught in it. Then I heard Tessa from the front row. Don't touch her. Ethan's head turned so fast it almost made me flinch. Brooke stood too, but not with outrage. With panic. That tiny detail settled somewhere deep in me. Panic. Not confusion. Not anger. Panic. And then I knew the woman at the gate that morning had not been random at all. I took off the engagement ring right there at the altar and placed it in Ethan's palm. The whole room seemed to inhale. We're done, I said, though my voice came out thinner than I wanted. His fingers closed hard around the ring. For 1 second his mask dropped completely. His eyes went flat. Dead flat. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him and whispered, "You're making a very expensive mistake. Not heartbreaking. Not emotional. Expensive." Then he stepped back, lifted both hands like a man unfairly accused and told the room, "I'm sorry you all had to witness this." That was when I stopped grieving the wedding. Because I finally understood there had never been one. What came after was uglier than the interruption. People think once a lie is exposed, truth takes over. It doesn't. Truth limps. Lies sprint. Half the guests stared at me with sympathy. The other half stared with suspicion, like I might be the unstable one. The officiant disappeared into a side room. My cousins whispered. Someone's child started crying. Brooke rushed to me, grabbed my arm and hissed, "Do not make this bigger than it is." I looked at her. Bigger than what? Then some lunatic showing up with forged documents. Before I could answer, Naomi said, "If you want forged, ask him why his signature changed 3 times in 14 months. Brooke spun toward her. "Get out." Naomi didn't even look at her. She kept looking at me. "He's going to run." That snapped something awake inside me. I turned toward the chapel doors, but Ethan was already gone. Just like that. No speech. No defense. No staying to prove innocence. He ran. And that told me everything. The police came because the venue manager called them, but what they offered was maddeningly small. They took statements. They photographed Naomi's documents. They asked careful questions in professional voices. But fraud across states, identity issues, hospital records, money transfers, private relationships. It all turned into one giant swamp of not enough yet. One officer said, "If his name is false and there are financial crimes, we can open something, but we need more." As if a man needed to set the church on fire before anyone would agree smoke mattered. I changed out of my wedding dress in a locked bathroom while my hands shook so badly I couldn't get the zipper down. Tessa came in and helped me without saying a word. When she finally turned me around, my mascara had streaked halfway to my jaw and I looked like a child who had gotten dressed up for the wrong holiday. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," I said, and then I started sobbing so hard I had to sit on the floor. Because underneath the humiliation, there was a terrible rising relief. But that relief didn't last long. Naomi met me that evening at a 24-hour diner off Route 8, the kind with cracked red booths and burnt coffee. I had changed into jeans and one of my mother's old sweaters. She looked less wild in the fluorescent light, just exhausted. Her hands were raw around the knuckles, like she had been picking at them for weeks. "My sister's name is Rachel Mercer," she said. "He met her in a grief group after her fiancé died. Different city. Different name. Same script." Every muscle in my body went cold. Naomi slid a stack of papers across the table. "He told her he was Luke Danner. Said he was in construction. Said he wanted to build a life with her. Within 6 months he had access to her accounts, her car, her condo code. Then he started pushing insurance changes. Beneficiary changes. Power of attorney language. He told her it was all part of planning responsibly as a couple." I closed my eyes for a second. The consultation papers. The insurance questions. The house. When I looked up, Naomi's face had softened just a little. "I know exactly what he sounds like when he's pretending to protect you." "What happened to Rachel?" Naomi swallowed. "He pushed her down a staircase." I stopped breathing. "She lived," Naomi said quickly. "Barely. Brain injury. Crushed shoulder. Months in rehab. But by the time she could talk clearly again, he had emptied what he could and disappeared. Police said there wasn't enough proof it wasn't an accident. He vanished before we could pin him down." Then she leaned closer and said, "Until I saw your engagement photo online." I felt sick, so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the booth. I didn't know the bottom could fall out twice in one day. When I got home that night, the front gate was open. I never leave the gate open. The house was dark, quiet, wrong. Tessa came in behind me with her phone flashlight on. The kitchen drawers were half open. The small desk in the hall where I kept property papers had been searched. Not trashed exactly. Searched. Someone careful, someone purposeful. And in the bedroom closet, the metal box where I kept important documents was gone. So was the folder holding the unsigned real estate packet. Tessa looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said his name. I checked my bank app. The joint wedding account Ethan told me would make planning simpler had been emptied that afternoon. $15,640. Gone. My whole body started shaking. I called Brooke first because panic makes idiots of us. She answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. I told her about the missing lockbox, the money, the open gate. There was a pause, and then she said the most unforgivable thing anyone has ever said to me. "Ava, are you sure you're not spiraling?" Spiraling. I nearly dropped the phone. "Did you hear anything I just said?" "I'm saying be careful before you accuse someone because you're embarrassed." Embarrassed. Not robbed. Not deceived. Embarrassed. I hung up on her. And that was the moment my grief turned into rage. The next 2 days were a blur of police reports, frozen accounts, humiliating phone calls to vendors, and trying to remember every paper I had signed in the last 6 months. Ethan's number went dead. His apartment address turned out to be a short-term corporate rental. The renovation company he claimed to work with had never heard of him. Even his driver's license photo, the one he had once flashed at a wine bar when we got carded, was probably fake. A person can stand in front of you for months and still be a costume. Naomi didn't leave town. That surprised me. I think part of me expected her to drop the papers and disappear like some messenger of doom. But she stayed. She drove me to the bank. She sat beside me at the police station. She knew which questions to ask because she had already learned the hard way how systems fail women slowly enough to remain polite. At one point, while we waited for a detective, I asked her, "Why are you helping me this much?" She looked straight ahead. "Because no one helped Rachel until it was too late." That answer cut deeper than comfort. And then we found something worse. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, Naomi called me at 6:14 a.m. and said, "Check your email. Right now." I opened it and saw a county property notification I didn't remember signing up for. The subject line mentioned my address. My blood went cold. Someone had initiated a file request connected to my house. Not a completed sale, but access. Movement. I was halfway into my jeans before I realized my hands were numb. Naomi picked me up and we drove straight to the county records office. Tessa met us there. After 40 miserable minutes and a lot of begging, a clerk finally confirmed that someone had requested duplicate property documents using personal data that matched mine almost perfectly. Almost. Wrong middle initial. A man using partial authorization paperwork and claiming to be acting on behalf of a forthcoming marital transfer. Marital transfer. He had been planning to use my marriage to touch the house. Maybe take it. Maybe leverage it. Maybe sell against it. Maybe all three. I leaned against the counter because the room tilted. Tessa muttered, "That bastard." But Naomi wasn't looking at the clerk anymore. She was staring at one of the attached file names on the monitor. "Can you pull the supporting ID copy?" she asked. The clerk hesitated. "I probably shouldn't." Naomi leaned in. "Please." A minute later, a grainy scan appeared. My stomach dropped. The face was Ethan's. The signature wasn't. The listed emergency contact, however, was one name only. Brooke Hart. For a second I honestly thought I had read it wrong. I stepped closer. "No." The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Do you know this individual?" No one answered. Because at that point knowing wasn't the problem. Surviving knowing was. I drove straight to Brooke's condo without calling first. Tessa came with me. Naomi followed in her car. I pounded on Brooke's door until she opened it in a silk robe, expression already loaded with irritation. "What is wrong with you?" I shoved my phone in her face, the screenshot of the county file glowing between us. "Why is your name on this?" She barely looked at it. "I don't know." "Don't lie to me." Brooke crossed her arms. "I am not lying. I was probably listed from wedding paperwork, Ava. Stop acting insane." Tessa stepped forward. "You were his emergency contact for a property transfer." Brooke's face changed, but only slightly. A flicker. Then cool again. "I don't know what he put down." "Why would he put you down at all?" I shouted. He finally snapped. "Because someone in this family had to deal with reality." The words bounced off the hallway walls. I stared at her. She seemed to realize she had said too much because her voice dropped immediately. "Look, he talked to me, okay? He wanted to help you. You were drowning in that house, in Mom's ghost, in your own grief. Maybe he overstepped. That doesn't mean he's some criminal mastermind." Naomi laughed from behind me and it was a hard, ugly sound. "My sister still has headaches so bad she throws up in the dark." Brooke looked at her with open disgust. "I don't know you." "No," Naomi said. "You just help men like him find women like us." Brooke's face went white. That was all I needed. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, Tessa came over with a bottle of cheap wine and a memory she said she had been trying to ignore because it seemed too petty at the time. "Your mom's funeral reception," she said slowly. "Before you and Ethan met properly. I saw Brooke outside by the hydrangeas. She was talking to him." I stared at her. "What?" She told me later he was some contractor asking about old houses in the neighborhood. I forgot about it because everything that day was awful. But Ava, she knew him before the hardware store. My mouth went dry. Brooke had introduced him into my life, then pretended surprise when we fell in love. No, not love. When I fell. The next morning, Naomi took me to a storage facility 40 minutes away. It was one Rachel had used under her maiden name. Naomi had finally gotten access after months of legal back and forth, but she hadn't found the courage to go through the last box because it held Rachel's things from before the attack. "I thought maybe there'd be something," she said quietly. I didn't know if I wanted it to be true. Inside the box were clothes, photo albums, a cracked picture frame, and a small fireproof document pouch. Naomi unzipped it with trembling fingers. We found hospital records, copies of bank statements, and a cheap silver voice recorder. Naomi stared at it like it might bite. "Rachel used to record herself notes," she whispered. "Because after the injury she was afraid of forgetting." We took it to her car and played the last file. At first all we heard was rustling. Then Rachel's voice, shaky and frightened. "If anything happens to me, his real name might be Ethan now." "Brooke." I heard him on the phone tonight. He thinks I was asleep. Pause. My heartbeat slammed in my ears. He said, "No, Brooke, this one's easier. She just lost her mother. The house is in her name. Blue Victorian corner lot. Give me a week and she'll think I hung the moon." I think something inside me literally tore. Rachel kept talking through static and pain. He said after the wedding, Brooke gets her part when the house moves. He said lonely women sign anything if you tell them it means forever. Naomi stopped the recording because I had made a sound that did not feel human. There was not suspicion, not theory, not possibility. My sister had fed me to him. And then the truth got even uglier. I went home in a daze and tore through the desk in my mother's old room. Somewhere in the back, under tax folders and hospice receipts, I found a sealed envelope in my mother's handwriting. For Ava. If things become clear late. My hands shook so badly I nearly ripped it in half. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before she died. Ava, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry that Brooke would not let go of what she feels I owe her. I changed the will because care is not measured by words, and this house became yours long before the paperwork said so. Brooke already took money from my account once and blamed the nurse. I protected what I could. If she learns what remains in the house papers, she may become desperate. Please trust actions over apologies. At the bottom was an attachment note directing me to a second envelope hidden in the sewing cabinet. Inside that one were photocopies of bank withdrawals Brooke had made during Mom's treatment, and a handwritten note from my mother. She thinks grief makes people blind. Don't prove her right. I sat on the floor for a long time with those papers in my lap, staring at the loops of my mother's handwriting until the words blurred. I had spent years believing Brooke was selfish. I had never imagined she was dangerous. And I still didn't know the worst part. The detective handling our case changed his tone when he heard Rachel's recording. Suddenly words like conspiracy and fraud appeared. Suddenly phone records mattered. Suddenly it mattered that Ethan had used multiple aliases, that my account had been emptied, that property documents were in motion, that Brooke had prior financial irregularities involving our mother. But there was still a problem. Charges take time, the detective said. If he knows you're working with us, he may disappear again. So what do we do? I asked. He looked at me carefully. We need him to reach for the prize. Naomi understood before I did. You want her to bait him. The detective didn't answer directly, which is how professionals say yes when liability is involved. At first I refused. Absolutely not. I had already been humiliated in front of everyone I knew. I had already learned my sister would sell me out for a cut of a house. I had already spent nights jumping at every sound outside my window. The idea of inviting Ethan back into my life even for an hour made my skin crawl. Then he texted me from a new number. I know you're angry, but Brooke says you're finally willing to talk. Good. We can still fix this. I stared at the message until the letters looked like insects. We can still fix this. As if betrayal were a scheduling issue. As if my life were a contract he expected me to sign after edits. That was the moment I said yes. I told the detective I would do it. And then everything became a clock. We arranged it for the following evening at my house. I would tell Ethan I had calmed down, that I knew Brooke had only been trying to help, that I was overwhelmed and willing to discuss the property transfer if it meant ending the public mess. I hated every word of the script. But apparently men like Ethan believe forgiveness is always available if they speak confidently enough. Tessa wanted to stay in the room. The detective said no. Naomi wanted to confront him herself. Also no. They would both be nearby along with officers in unmarked cars. My kitchen and living room would be wired for audio. All I had to do was keep them talking. All I had to do. The night they came it rained. Not dramatic movie rain. Thin, cold April rain that taps at the windows like nervous fingers. I stood in my mother's kitchen wearing jeans and a plain sweater, no makeup, hair loose. I wanted no trace of bridal softness left on me. I wanted to look like the version of myself he had underestimated. Brooke arrived first. Of course she did. She walked in without waiting to be invited, glanced around the kitchen like she still half-owned it and said, "You look tired." I laughed once. "You look guilty." Her jaw flexed. "Let's not do theater tonight." Funny. That's exactly what got us here. For a second I thought she might leave. But she didn't. She moved closer and lowered her voice. "You've always done this, Ava. turned every disappointment into proof someone betrayed you. I stared at her. You put me in his path. No, she snapped. I introduced you to opportunity. Opportunity. I almost admired the cruelty of it. Then Ethan knocked and let himself in like he had never stolen from me, lied to me, or stood at an altar waiting to legally tie himself to my life. He wore a charcoal coat, wet at the shoulders from rain, and for one terrible second muscle memory betrayed me. My chest tightened. My body remembered him before my mind could stop it. That's the ugliest thing about manipulation. Your nerves grieve even after truth arrives. Ava, he said softly as if we were meeting after a minor argument. Thank you for this. I didn't offer him a seat. Brooke closed the kitchen door behind him. The click sounded like a trap. He smiled that old practice smile. You look better. I know what you are, I said. His smile barely shifted. You know what hurt people have told you. Naomi had been right. He had a tone for protection. A tone for reason. A tone that made madness sound elegant. I folded my arms. Why did you empty the account? He exhaled like a patient teacher. Because after the scene you caused, I assumed you were going to freeze me out financially. The scene I caused. Ava, please. I'm trying to lower the temperature. Brooke stepped in then, playing peacemaker so naturally it made me sick. We're all upset. But if this turns into lawsuits and criminal complaints, everybody loses. The house gets tied up. The money gets tied up. Your life gets dragged through court. There was. Not your heart. Not your safety. The house. The money. I let silence stretch. Then I said the line we had planned. What exactly do you want from me? Ethan and Brooke looked at each other. Just once. Just enough. And that was all. But what Brooke said next was worse than anything I had imagined. She gave a small, tired laugh and leaned against my mother's old counter. I want you to stop acting like you're the only daughter who suffered. The room went still. I whispered, what? Her face hardened into something I had never fully seen before, though maybe it had always lived there. You got everything, Ava. The house. The sympathy. The saint's story. The devoted daughter who gave up her 20s. Do you know what I got? I got to be the selfish one because I refused to drown beside you. I felt my nails digging into my palms. You stole from Mom. Brooke's eyes flashed. I took what should have been mine. Ethan murmured, Brooke. No, let her hear it. She stepped closer to me, voice shaking now with years of old poison. Mom forgave you for everything because you stayed. You think staying made you holy? It made you convenient. Someone had to sit in the sick room so everyone could say what a good girl you were. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. So you handed me to a criminal? Brooke's laugh cracked. You handed yourself over. You were starving to be chosen. He barely had to try. That hit because it was cruel and because a small piece of it was true. Ethan sighed like the conversation had become messy in a way he regretted. We're getting off track. My life had almost been stolen and he wanted the meeting back on agenda. I asked quietly, how many women? He looked at me and actually smiled. Not kindly. Proudly. Enough to know the pattern. The air left my lungs. Brooke turned toward him, startled. Ethan. No, he said, still looking at me. She wants honesty now, right? Then his face changed fully. The softness vanished. The lover vanished. What stood in my kitchen was the man Naomi had warned me about at the altar. I didn't pick you because you were rich, he said. I picked you because you were grateful. Big difference. Women with money ask questions. Women with grief apologize for having needs. Women like you call manipulation support if it comes with flowers. I heard something break in the sink and realized it was my own hand knocking a glass over. He kept going. You were so easy to study. The lonely daughter. The dead mother. The sister rivalry. The old house full of guilt. All I had to do was step into the role you were already writing for someone. Behind him, Brooke had gone pale. Because even she hadn't realized she was only one of his tools. And then everything exploded. The back door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Naomi stormed in before anyone could stop her. You son of a bitch. Ethan spun. What the? Naomi didn't let him finish. He launched.